While the Europeans have presented the Americans with their proposal for the peace in Ukraine, the presidents of the United States and of Ukraine have met at the funeral of the Pope to talk and have a bilateral talk without any aid. Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, said afterwards it could have potentially a historic meaning. But we'll talk about this as well as about anything else that has happened along the front lines and behind them in this situation report about the war in Ukraine. Russia struck Ukraine with a massive attack in the air. They used 145 drones and 70 missiles and cruise missiles. The attack on Kiev alone, that you can see here, has killed nine civilians there and wounded 80 others. Among the hits was a KN-23 from North Korea that hit an apartment block. Also interesting to see here on the pictures is how the Russians choose the path for their weapons to avoid air defense. It's clearly visible that the paths are meant to attack cities from different directions and to avoid air defense systems in certain areas. Then the Ukrainians have now confirmed that they attacked the Shahid factory in Tatarstan. They said that the Russians are producing 300 Garand 2. Those are equivalent to the Shahid 136 per day. 300 per day, which is also interesting because we do not see 300 per day appearing along the front lines. Then we have that they also said they managed to damage the final assembly. To which degree and whether that is going to slow the Russians down is not yet known. Other attacks against the Ukrainians were with 103 drones, 81 of them intercepted, and another day 114 were fired upon or used against them. 114 were shot down out of 134, so the success rate hovers around 20% right now. Recently, the Russians also used drones against Kharkiv, and according to the Ukrainians, they were carrying warheads of 90 kilograms instead of 40. Also, they were more resistant against electronic warfare. In general, this should be somewhat possible. Obviously, if the range is shortened, then you need less fuel and you could pack a bigger warhead. And with Kharkiv being close to the border, depending on where they launched them, they could have saved the majority of the fuel and replaced it with explosives. We go to the developments along the front line here, and we start in the Sumy region. The Russians have advanced in the southern Shuravka, which is here. We have a geolocation of this. According to that, the Russians have basically reached the last houses of Shuravka. Whether they fully control it now is probably a little early, but it's quite possible at the same time. East of it, the town of Lokna has shown additional Russian presence. We have the Russians in the northern houses here. Once again, Russian presence inside of Lokna is being confirmed. The Russians have also advanced inside of Kursk. We have them in the town of Oleshnya, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Oleshnya, according to this, yeah. They have entered the first houses, so the town is now contested. The Russians also advanced to the east of it. First, they were in the north of Gornal, and a fresh geolocation shows them inside of Gornal. Again, this town here is contested. Whether it's fully occupied by the Russians yet or fully liberated, this is Russian territory, is unclear. The Russians have also crossed the river south of Guevo, which would indicate that Guevo is probably fully under their control. There are already claims that the Ukrainians are fully pushed out of Kursk. While this is theoretically possible, we do not have visual evidence of this yet. It's quite possible that the Ukrainians still have a presence in the western part of Oleshnya and in the southern part of Gornal, roughly in this area, might still be under Ukrainian occupation. But other than that, Guevo is probably fully back in Russian hands, and the Russian presence, the Ukrainian presence inside of Kursk is shrinking by the day. Further southeast in the Belgorod region, we have a reports about continued fighting close to Demidovka and Popovka. According to Russian mill bloggers, the Ukrainians did counterattacks as well. And there is a geolocation of a Russian soldier in the very southwest of the town of Demidovka, walking around there and then being killed, from what I've seen in the original source, probably through rifle fire, which would indicate that the Russians likely control all of Demidovka, but that the Ukrainians are close by, probably in those tree lines here, directly south of it. That was indicated with this, but Demidovka might be fully back under Russian control according to the geolocations. Southeast of it, in the Kharkiv region, I have nothing to report at all. On the Eastern Front, we have reports about fresh mechanized attacks by the Russians in the Liman direction. The Ukrainians say they defeated all of it. We do not have any credible claims of Russian advances here. South of the Seversky Donetsk, the same. No reports from Seversk or from Chasiv Yar that indicate a credible change of the control of the front line. And to the south, I don't know, I switched too fast. This is Chasiv Yar. So Seversk and Chasiv Yar, we do not have any credible change. In Toretsk, we do have some changes. We have the Russians north of Toretsk. We have a geolocation here. At this is a water pipe that is being struck by the Ukrainians. Let me see, it's the middle lake. So the Russians are already at this point here. They managed to get further north in this direction, but the Ukrainians are also having fresh presence inside of Toretsk. We have them here in that industrial area, and Ukrainians were here in the western houses of the southern quarter here. So here as well, the Ukrainians still have a presence, in this case, roughly around this area. To the west of it, we have the Russians advancing in Lysivka. Recently, we had the Ukrainians operating in the southern part of it, and now we have a geolocation showing that the center road, there was Russian presence here, and in that area to the southwest, in this area here. Here and here is fresh Russian presence. This doesn't mean they fully control it, but it clearly shows that the area is contested and has Russian presence over there. That was it from Pokrovsk. In the Constantinople area, we have the Russians advancing north of Andrivka. They managed to take the houses here in this direction and roughly advanced in this direction. Andrivka probably has some Ukrainian presence left, but they are in the process of being pushed out. To the southwest, the Russians managed to advance west of Rozliv. We have a geolocation here as well, whereas the Russians are here. This is the river that we see on the map here. So the Russians are roughly at this point here with another fresh advance of theirs. Then we have the Ukrainians in new positions close to Orikhiv here at Malatokmachka. I showed you recently that a geolocation showed the Russians entering the town here, roughly in this area. And now we have the Ukrainians in these buildings south here, where they're getting shelled by the Russians, and that should be roughly around here. So likely Malatokmachka is fully under Ukrainian control. That was it with territorial changes. Other than that, I cannot confirm anything. We have then we have news from the Russian side. Major General Ivan Popov was sentenced to 5 years in prison for theft and other things. Whether or not those are true is obviously unclear. But he was the one that accused the Russian accused the Russian military leadership during the Ukrainian counteroffensive, who said publicly voiced his dissent and the problems he had, and was shortly arrested afterwards. Recently, it was reported by his lawyer that he would return to Ukraine to fight there, but apparently this was redrawn, this permission, and now he is stripped of his military rank and has to start a prison sentence. Then we have an absolutely wild message. The son of a CIA deputy director had joined the Russian armed forces and was killed in April last year in Ukraine. Currently, there is a picture circling around that supposedly shows the moment before he's being hit by a drone, but I heard several claims that this is Photoshop. Personally, I lack the competence to certainly say it in this picture, but as it's probably Photoshop, I'm not gonna spread it around here. But the interesting part is his mother was promoted to deputy director. His father is a veteran from the Gulf War, and his son apparently turned Marxist or something like this, and joined the Russian military to attain Russian citizenship to die for the Russians in Ukraine. Then we have news from sabotage and espionage area. Lieutenant General Yaroslav Moskalik was killed in Moscow with a car bomb. So far, I haven't seen the SBU saying that they were it, but it's obviously likely he was killed while passing on foot by exploding a bomb in a parked car that was filled with explosives and shrapnels that killed him. Then the Ukrainian side has reported that they have increased the production of the Bogdana self-propelled howitzer to 36 a month. So the production is continuing to increase and obviously help the Ukrainians with the supply of powerful 155 millimeter artillery. We go to the probably most important things, that is the meeting between Trump and Zelensky during the funeral of the Pope. Initially, the pictures show that they were talking with others too, and I've seen a video where at first there are 3 chairs and Macron is close to it, but it seems that Zelensky and Trump decided that they don't need somebody else, and they were talking just the 2 of them. Now, this is important for the first thing, that both of them met and both of them took the time to talk with each other. But then we have Zelensky saying we discussed a lot one-on-one, hoping for results on everything we covered, protecting lives of our people, full and unconditional ceasefire, reliable and lasting peace that will prevent another war from breaking out. Very symbolic meeting that has the potential to become historic. Now, obviously, this is cryptic and might just be him being nice and saying something nice, transferring hope. But we also have Donald Trump himself. Now, obviously, everyone else's fault, and he was the one providing weapons, and Obama was the one to give away Crimea. You can pause it and read it yourself. The important thing is in the South, though, at the end. With all that being said, there was no reason for Putin to be shooting missiles into civilian areas, cities and towns over the last few days. It makes me think, and this is the, in my mind, really important part, it makes me think that maybe he doesn't want to stop the war. No shit. He's just tapping me along and has to be dealt with differently, though through banking or secondary sanctions. So we can mock it that he seems to understand slowly that that Putin might not even want peace. But I guess slow understanding is better than no understanding at all. He seems to be understanding that he's being played by Putin. At least that's what he writes. And the interesting part is he has to be dealt with differently through banking or secondary sanctions. So I'm not sure if I misunderstand that, but I think he means that he has to think about different ways than banking or secondary sanctions. So other options to put pressure on Putin. And I guess that's good news if this is the conclusion, unless, of course, my English is failing me here and I do not understand him correctly. But we have other reports. Axios and The Telegraph have reported more details to Trump's suggestion for a ceasefire that is leading to a peace agreement. One of that would be free shipping, so uninterrupted shipping on the Dnipro River for Ukraine. That's the central river we have here. Uninterrupted shipping for that. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Enerhodar would be under US control. It would deliver electricity to both sides of the front line, and it would be considered Ukrainian territory under US administration. So it would still be part of the Ukrainian controlled area or Ukrainian territory according to this. They would also agree that no NATO membership for Ukraine, but it can pursue the European Union membership. The Russians would have to withdraw from Kharkiv up here. That would be the only thing they have to withdraw. And all US sanctions since 2014 would be lifted, so including those before the full-scale war. European troops would be a security guarantee with others that are willing, according to this. And of course, while the first things might be acceptable to the Russians already said the last thing is not acceptable. They will not accept European, which would usually mean NATO troops inside of Ukraine to protect it. And that was obvious. I've talked about it months ago when these were the things that were initially said, that European troops will not be accepted by Russia. They will have to be forced to accept it because it can at some point still drag all of NATO in if Russia decides to attack Ukraine again and there are NATO troops in place. And obviously the US protection for those NATO troops can be given at any time when the government in the United States changes. The European troops will then already be inside of Ukraine. They will already be accepted by Russia, and then overnight they could be under US umbrella and thus basically give a solid security guarantee to Ukraine, and that's something that Russia doesn't want and wants to prevent. Other than that, the Russians also emphasized that nothing has changed with their peace, with their war goals. That's obvious. They do this basically weekly. And the other thing was that the negotiations about the mineral agreement is continuing. The Ukrainian side has said the obvious too. They will not sign an agreement which will give Russia a stronger position for a future aggression. This is obviously somewhat up for interpretation, but it says also the more or less obvious thing. Then we have a European suggestion now being published by Reuters. Now, to summarize it, a complete ceasefire, immediate start of negotiations, how to do that ceasefire with the participation of the Europeans and the United States, but obviously also Ukraine and Russia. During that, already preparations for the settlement, the permanent settlement, so a peace agreement, surveillance of the ceasefire led by the US and supported through other nations. Russia has to return all the children they have abducted without any limitations, any restrictions. They have to hand over every single child they have abducted, and all prisoners of war would be exchanged against all other prisoners of war. So if the Russians have more Ukrainians, they would not exchange one-to-one and keep the rest. They would hand over everything. Ukraine would receive robust security guarantees, as it's being called, including from the US, comparable with Article 5, as long as there's no consent for the NATO membership. So the European suggestion says the US should basically give an Article 5 of NATO towards the Ukrainian side, and there would be no limitation for Ukrainian military size, equipment, etc. The guarantor states would be according to who wants it, who has the will to it, and there would be no limitations to their numbers and their means inside of Ukraine. So according to the European peace plan, the European nations, everyone who wants to aid Ukraine, guarantee the safety, will not be limited by an agreement to a certain troop number, to a certain type of weapon systems. This is the European offering. Ukraine would also continue the territorial, membership process of the European Union. In territorial terms, those would be negotiated after a ceasefire, starting at the current front line. So the negotiations would start with the current front line. This is obviously up for discussion again, but it would acknowledge that the front line is inside of Ukraine quite sizable. Then we have the Europeans basically agreed to the return of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant to Ukraine with a US participation, but the European suggestion also increases it towards the Kakhovka dam. Now, the dam is obviously destroyed right now, but this would allow it to be rebuilt, which also generated electricity and obviously flooded the whole area here, which would then probably also increase the protection again for the Ukrainians, as the area is less easy to traverse. Ukraine, with that agreement, would be allowed to use the Dnipro for shipping as they want to, and they would receive the Kinburn Spit back. This area here is the Kinburn Spit, and it's part of Mykolaiv Oblast, so it's actually another oblast where the Russians occupy a little piece. Because of this, Europeans demand that it's being returned. In economic terms, US and Ukraine would make the resource agreement. Ukraine would fully be rebuilt, including through the usage of frozen Russian money. Until Russia pays for the damages in Ukraine. The US sanctions against Russia can be slowly lifted while a permanent peace is achieved, and they would, if Russia breaks the peace, immediately snap back. And that was the European offering. And as we can see, this sounds like a fair deal, but it also sounds like something Russia will never accept as of now. So I'm still skeptical how anytime soon we should expect a ceasefire under these circumstances. Maybe we will see Trump now understanding that the threat of banking and secondary sanctions are not enough, but we'll have to see. Finally, we also have the participants on the in regards to the November 9th, May 9th parade. We see that here, that's the in the bottom, that's the president of Abkhazia, so the Russian separatist puppet regime inside of Georgia. He's also coming, and those are the other ones, including a president from the prime minister from a European Union and NATO country with Robert Fico. Those are the participants, and this was it for today's situation report. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. It helps with the algorithm. Leave a comment if you have something to add, and if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. At this point, I want to thank once again Sam Garcia, who sent me even more books. Warships of the Soviet Fleets 1939 to 1945, Volume 1. Major Combatants, and the same book, Volume 2, Escorts and Smaller Fighting Ships. I think, Sam, you sent me enough books. I think you were responsible for 80% of all the books donated to me in the last 3 months. So thank you very much once again. I really, really appreciate it. If you want to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. But that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.